who I am is not important. What is important is that by the end of this video, you understand how the child-rearing system in Fire Emblem Fates completely fails where Fire Emblem Awakening succeeds. Now, in a typical video essay, this would be the part where I spend 7 minutes talking about the entire history of the Fire Emblem franchise. I'm not going to do that. It's an extremely famous Japanese RPG. You control various characters whose classes and weapons you can customize as you move them around the gridded map and match them up against many different enemies. It has been a feature of these games for years now to have an affection system. When you put two units side by side during combat, they will build affection for each other each time they attack or are attacked while next to someone else. If the two units in question are of the same sex, they will become better friends or siblings. But if your two units are a man and a woman, then in most cases, they will get married. The player gets a few cutscenes of the characters bonding, and at the end of the game, we get a short description of what each character or couple is up to after the war. In fact, some characters have better or worse endings, depending on if or who you pair them with. However, things changed with the release of Fire Emblem Awakening, the game that revitalized and ultimately saved the franchise. The old heads in the community love to discount it and talk about how the games were better back in the good old days. But the simple truth is that Fire Emblem would have gone the way of F-Zero if Awakening had not been made as it was when it was. Of its many new features and improvements upon the formulas of old, the one that got people's attention the most was the child-rearing system. The affection system from the old games was still present here, but now, pairing units together could result in the creation of a child unit, which would have a combination of the parent's skills and stats. Now, you might be asking yourself, if the characters are getting married over the course of the story, how could their children possibly reach fighting age before the end of the game? That is a very important question. A question to which Awakening and Fates had very different answers. I will be leaving out a lot of details from the plot to cut down on spoilers, but there will still be some mild story spoilers ahead. Regardless, I would heavily encourage anyone to play this game anyway. You don't even need a 3DS these days, if you catch my drift. At its center, Awakening is a story about time travel, in the vein of Terminator. The evil king of Plagia seeks to resurrect the foul god dragon Grima. Chrom, the crown prince of the peace-loving nation of Yllis, must lead his friends, knights, mercenaries, and scoundrels into battle against the dark forces which assault his kingdom with dark magic. But unbeknownst to Chrom, things are much more serious than he knows. A few chapters into the story, Chrom meets a strange young woman named Lucina, who reveals some harsh truths. She is from the future, and Chrom and his friends are destined to lose this war. Grima is destined to be resurrected, leading to a slow but inescapable apocalypse. The characters of Awakening will try to raise their children the best they can, but will eventually lose their lives to the enemy, leaving their children to fend for themselves in a ruined world. How does she know this? Because Lucina is Chrom's daughter from that ruined future, and presents her father's own sword to him, both existing in the same place and time despite only one ever being made. Lucina discovered and performed an ancient rite that sent her and any of her friends into the past, with the goal of stopping Grima's resurrection from happening in the first place. From this point on, the child-rearing system is introduced to the player. From now on, if two of your units get married, the potential for them to have children in the future now exists. This causes the future child of that couple to appear in a brand new level somewhere on the world map, where you must go through a brutally difficult battle in order to recruit this new soldier. For clarity's sake, I will explain that half of the characters have a specific child tied to them. For instance, Lucina is tied to Chrom getting married. No matter who he marries, Lucina will be the result. Let's take a look at another character, Sully. No matter who she marries, she will produce the future child, Kjell. If Sully were to marry Lon'qu or Rickon, Kjell would still be the result, although that child would have different skills and stats depending on who the father was. If Chrom and Sully were to be wed, then both Lucina and Kjell would be produced, and they would have unique dialogue as sisters. All of this to say that while the idea of children traveling back in time to fight alongside their teenage parents is an admittedly cool concept, it takes a lot of effort to justify that premise. Effort that the creators of Awakening put in. They knew the only way this premise would work would be through time travel, so the game is about time travel. Lucina's journey to the past is an essential part of the story. This mechanic is built into the narrative of Awakening. If you remove the child-rearing system from this game, the story would be incomplete. That is why they took the time to build up the game's world and storytelling to hold up such a weighty premise. But what exactly would it look like if one didn't do those things? Fates was the next Fire Emblem game to come out after Awakening. Although they knew they had to mix things up a bit, the developers desperately wanted to capture the love and praise Awakening had received. And so in many ways, the devs kept things the same. The same artists, same menu layout, even a couple of blatantly recycled characters. However, our focus is on the affection and child-rearing system, which was imported directly from Awakening without changes. When you pair units together, they will eventually marry and produce a child with a mix of their parents' stats and skills. These children will appear in difficult bonus levels across the world map. At this point, you must be asking yourself, well, wait, how are they doing that? Did they reuse the time travel plot again? No. No, they did not. A little background. Early in the game, the player character, Prince Corrin, discovers that one of his servants is actually an astral creature. This creature, named Lilith, is capable of taking Corrin into the astral plane. There, Corrin and his army have a base, which serve as the player's hub for collecting resources, buying from shops, and interacting with their units in between levels. All of this is told to the player, and it is fairly acceptable. No mention of having children is brought up when the game teaches you about the affection system. Yet when the player has their first two units reach marriage, the player gets a short scene explaining to them how, quote, "These people's love leads to marriage, and that marriage eventually leads to something wonderful. A child. But the castle that everyone called home was no safe place for infants. Where could newborns be hidden in such dangerous times? The answer was in the deep realms. Tiny worlds strewn across the astral plane. In the blink of an eye, babies grew into children, soon after, to adulthood." Okay, I know there's a lot to break down here, but I'll do my best to help. Yes, the characters in this game are putting their newborn infants into pocket dimensions to be raised by servants. However, time flows differently within these pocket worlds. Think Interstellar. It passes at a much faster rate than the outside world. We have confirmation from at least one of the child-parent conversations in Fates that these child units literally go from infants to teenagers in a matter of weeks. I'm sure you guys are starting to see the cracks here, but let me illuminate further. Problem 1. Logistics. Even if the children can grow up rapidly inside these deep realms, what the hell are their pregnant mothers doing for 9 months? That is one of the crucial differences between the systems of these two games. No one is actually getting pregnant in Awakening. 2 people getting married creates the potential to have a child, that potential manifesting as a literal person in the future. Think of Back to the Future. If Marty's parents don't start dating, that potential for Marty to exist disappears, causing him to never exist at all. However, that is not the case in Fates. They show a picture of an infant, saying that the love from the marriage created it. This is implying that the female characters of this game, who, keep in mind, are all literal frontline soldiers, are getting physically pregnant. When are these time skips happening? There's certainly no indication of such things occurring in the game. It also misses one of the fundamental dynamics of Awakening. Part of what made the mechanic and the interactions between the child and the parent unit so interesting is that the parent units aren't really parents. They are a few days into being married and suddenly have a traumatized teenager on their doorstep that they now have to work with. In several cases, the future child is literally older than one of their own parents. But in Fates, the units actually are parents, which kind of makes you feel more like you're watching a teen mom TV show rather than an in-depth fantasy story. The second major problem: cruelty. One major oversight the developers had when they created this system is that they did not fully think through the potential for trauma. Let's be generous and assume these child units in Fates are only 16 years old on average. Let's be generous again and assume that when the game says a few weeks, they mean 2 months. No matter how you break it down, it is implying that for every 24 hours passed outside of the Deep Realm, weeks are passing within the Deep Realm. That means that even if the parents were to visit their child inside the Deep Realm once a day, from the child's perspective, they would be going huge stretches of time without any parental affection, knowing only the touch of the servants appointed to look after them. This goes way past the realm of simple emotional neglect. Some child units still love their parents and want to leave the Deep Realm to help them. Some, rightfully, are resentful of their parents and simply want to escape and are intercepted by the player character along the way. All of the child units, at one time or another during their support conversations with their parents, mention how lonely they felt growing up. It's honestly kind of heartbreaking. The children of Awakening also grew up lonely, but that was because their parents died fighting as resistance fighters against a demonic overlord. The parents of Fate simply didn't have the time or room to raise them, so they shoved their babies into the growing up machine. It feels like an insult to the existential dread that the characters of Awakening had to fight against. So where does all this leave us? I'm not going to pull an angry video game nerd and exclaim, "What were they thinking?" Because I know exactly what they were thinking. The child-rearing system was a massive success in Awakening, and they so desperately wanted to include it in their follow-up game, even though there was no way to justify such a move within the game's story. Awakening was built around the child unit system, whereas it was clearly shoehorned in to Fate. I honestly feel bad for the writers at Nintendo who were told they must come up with a way to include child units without using time travel. If there's anything to take from this video, it is a warning to creators to not get tangled up in the past, to let it bind you, to become so obsessed with recapturing it that you lose sight of your goals. Thankfully, Nintendo did learn their lesson. No Fire Emblem game since Fates has had a child-rearing system, and it truly might be the last. I personally wouldn't mind seeing it return one day, but it would have to be done the right way. As I've often said, it's better not to do something than to do it wrong. I hope you're all a little wiser now, and at least a little more interested in the groundbreaking game that is Fire Emblem Awakening. Until we meet again.